Good day, everyone, and a warm welcome to our next business application webinar. It's great to see all of you. Glad that you can join for the session today. My name is Lizette de Villiers. I'll be the host, and I will shortly hand over to our presenter, Pieter de Villiers, who's the author and functional developer of the Shadowmatch system. And currently, he still holds the role as Head of Research and Development at Shadowmatch. The topic for this afternoon is retrenchments, also known as employee reduction, or layoffs. In some of the other countries, they refer to staff layoffs. In South Africa, we refer to it as retrenchments. Please note that we will be recording this webinar. You've seen that I've enabled the recording. The purpose for that is we make it part of our resources on our information website, and afterwards we also send the recording to people that have asked for it that cannot join today. You will notice that your microphone is currently on the mute setting. It will remain like that for the duration of the webinar. You're welcome to make use of the chat function. Should you want to send any comments or post a question, you're welcome to do that. At the end of the webinar, I will stop the recording, and then I will enable the setting for you to unmute your microphone, and then you are welcome to ask your questions live or just make a comment or participate in a live discussion. From my side, that's all the administrative arrangements. Thank you very much, Pieter. Over to you.
Thank you, Lizette. Welcome, everybody. And we will start immediately with the notes so that we follow one another. Lizette has done everything nice, friendly, and complete. So let's start with the work. And we fit it into the hour that we have available, and maybe save a few minutes if we can for questions. So what we're going to discuss is retrenchments, staff reductions, layoffs. These are the different words. I see that the word that is most often used in the North Americas and in Canada is workforce reduction, which I haven't got on the list. But these are all the references that we have to the events in a business of laying people off, setting people out of their jobs, ending their employment, and we have hundreds of words that we can probably use to say your work has been ended with us. What we will talk about today is some of the principles and the impact that this might have on a business and on the employees and the society in a broader sense, and on clients. Next week, what we will do is we will show you how Shadowmatch wants to help to make this sort of unfortunate practice or scenario more livable and more bearable for everybody. Because, as you know, our saying at the Shadowmatch Research, Development and Management Practices Head Office, Shadowmatch is there to ensure success for all. And that means that we want success for a business, but we also want success for the employees and the individuals and everybody that is that works with our system and could find any support from the system. So let's begin and take an overview. These are the things that we will discuss. Why do these things happen? What sits behind most of these workforce reduction practices? And then the different types of workforce reduction, there are different ways and different types of workforce reduction, layoffs, retrenchments. These are all the same. And then the future of employment, just a bit of what do we anticipate to happen with the world of work in the near and the sort of midterm 10, 15 years future. And then the 5 important aspects of the impact of workforce reduction on the credibility of business leaders, employees who stay, employees who will leave the business, in other words, those that are retrenched, laid off, on clients and on the brand of the business. Let's start with the first one, and that is, why does it happen? In broad terms, there are 6 reasons why companies go through the practice of layoffs, and there might be other reasons, but these sort of cater for about 90% of layoffs. The first one is the holding board or the senior executives or the business owners or the directors wants to secure profit targets. Now, this is a bit of an unfortunate situation because what happens is, and we've had a few of these, and I have done a bit of reading and a bit of research where companies in their financial year, the directors or the business owners or the senior executive management becomes aware of the fact that they're not going to make their profit targets. And if they don't make their profit targets, then they're not going to secure their personal bonuses, because what they are being promised by the board or by the owners is that if you make these targets, this will be your bonuses. And then in order to secure their profit targets, what they do is they lay off a number of people, and then they employ a number again at the beginning of the next financial year. But just to make it through this financial year, what they do is they then tend to lay off some of their employees, and sometimes quite a lot of them. There are examples where a CEO has decided to retrench about 500 employees in order to secure his own personal bonus. So this is an unfortunate situation that we must be aware of. The second is to reduce the cost of doing business. Now, what we must remember that if the business environment changes and there are some realities in the world of business that turn against a specific company, then it becomes very difficult to keep the business running. And in order to reduce the cost of business, what they do is they cut employment. So they cut the salary bill. Just between brackets, a comment that we need to make and that we must keep in mind that for about 93%, and I think it could even be high, be more than that, but it seems like there are about 7 to 10% companies for which their salary bill is not their single most costly item on their expense account. So salaries they represent a huge cost of running a business. So in order to keep the business running and to keep the business alive and to reduce the cost of doing business, you've got to then, some companies, then they don't have a choice. They have to cut the big expenses, and the salary bill is the first one that they say, well, we've got to cut this. So these are, when we go through the COVID situation with the virus, this happened with many companies, that they had to just cut down their cost, and we will get to this example a little bit later. Political realities can change the business environment. For instance, what we have currently with Russia and the Ukraine is that some of the governments in NATO has now gone public and said, you've got to choose you've got a choice as a business. You either do business in Russia or in our country. So that's it. You've got to close down your Russian side of the business, or we close you down on this side. So these political realities sometimes make it very difficult for a company to keep the business running, and then they've got to reduce their cost of running the business in order to survive and to ensure the future of the business. It is imperative for the survival of a business sometimes. Sometimes you just don't have a choice. You must either choose between reducing the number of employees or close the business down. And this happens quite often. In big companies, it's not that often, but in sort of the medium to large enterprises, we see this quite often where things have changed, the markets change, the products are not that high in demand anymore, or there's a shift away from specific products, or something very weird might happen. A product could suddenly be perceived as unhealthy, or there's a turn in the vibe against a product, and then it becomes an imperative for the survival of a business. You've got to just cut the cost. And then it's a way of dealing with employee demands. This is an important one, and it's the brother of number 5 on the list, the labor unions and legislation. These two are sort of, we could actually see them as one, but I've decided to deal with them separately for a reason. It's a way of dealing with employee demands. Sometimes employees organize themselves as the enemy of a business. So what they do is they push demands against the company that the company can just not meet. It's just impossible. It could be salary demands, it could be benefits, it could be whatever it might be, but the business just doesn't have the financial reserves to meet the demands of the employees. So what the employees then do is they organize themselves, sometimes in a labor union and sometimes not even in an organized official structure. And then they start to push these demands into the company and against the company. And it becomes a very negative relationship. And the company then starts to lose clients, or it might lose functionalities, or the productivity of the company is not where it should be. And then they decide to restructure. And with a restructure, they then cut and say, let's cut these employees out. So it's sometimes they're not left with a choice, but there must be a better way out. It shouldn't happen in the first case, we must say to one another, but it happens. Then labor unions and legislation. This is a big issue. Dear delegates, this is a big issue, because what happens is that in some countries around the world, legislation makes it extremely difficult to lay people off and to go through a process of employee reduction. And then the labor unions would push the end of the benefits of the employees. And at the end, the company just say, you know what, if I have to do business within this legislative environment and with the power that the labor unions have, I'd rather close the business, lay everybody off, wait for a year, restart the business, and employ a critical minimum employees from the word go. So these are reasons. The labor unions, I believe, globally play an important role in pushing companies too far. And that brings us to point number 6. So what happens? We get rid of people. How? We automate the system. That's it. That's it. It's easy. I have let's say, for instance, I run a service business, a bank or a financial services or a medical aid or whatever it might be, any of these. It might even be something different. And I have a customer service call center with 500 people working there. I can replace them with one computer, one automated voice recognition system, and I replace that entire workforce like this. So at the end of the day, I don't need them. This is what happened in some countries with petrol attendants. They went on a strike, and the gas stations, the fuel stations, the petrol station couldn't provide the fuel to their customers, and they said, we'll get rid of everybody. The customer can fill their car themselves and then pay and drive off. That's it. They just got rid of them. So what happens currently is companies tend to automate in order to get, and this is probably the most harsh thing that you will hear me say today, is just to get rid of the frustration. You know, in the mining industry, for instance, it's quite easy. You buy remote mining machinery, they go underground, they don't have families, they can't die, they can become damaged, and then you write it off and claim back from insurance. And you've got a few mining engineers on ground level, and they work these machines and they produce the stuff that the mines must get out of the ground. So automation is the big drive to go through a process of staff and employee reduction or workforce reduction. So these are the reasons broadly. There are some other reasons, but most of them will fit in one of these headings. Then the types of workforce reduction practices. The first one is spontaneous. How does that work? The CEO or the holding board or the head of HR or whoever makes the decision says, we do not appoint people when somebody resigns. That's it. If somebody resigns, find somebody internally that can do that job, or spread the work amongst the employees that stay behind, we do not recruit. Finish. So this is a natural attrition process. So as people resign over a period of time, they don't replace, and in doing so, the employee numbers, the workforce is being reduced in terms of numbers. This is a soft way. It's a very soft way, and it's probably one of the more positive ways of workforce reduction. It's not, there's no announcement, there's a bit of negative energy that could hang around in the corridors of the business. People might talk a bit and say, you know, I've got to take over 10% of this individual's work, and 20% of that individual's work is now going to end on my table and in my inbox. So, but it's not a high impact. It's sort of a soft, natural way of reducing the staff numbers. Then the second one is when this is being forced by outside realities. COVID-19 is probably the one that we will all remember for many years, and at best. What happened with COVID-19, it just came out of thin air, and some companies had to lay off 50% of their employees, some 75%, some 90%. Some even had to lay off everybody, and they went out of business. So for the ones that survived, it was excellent. If a business survived COVID-19, it's a strong business. So this is forced by an outside reality that the business cannot control. It's something just happened. It came out of thin air. We never planned for it. It's not because of anybody's wrongdoing. It's not as a result of poor planning or poor financial management or squandering money, or it's not because of that. It's just things just happen. Acquisitions, mergers are in the same bracket. A company might take over another business. I worked with a case many years ago, about 15 years ago, where a company took over another business, and they said, but we don't need your people. How many people do you have employed? 400. Yeah, but we don't want them. So how are you going to deal with the customers that you get? And with no, we just take your book, we load it onto our system, and we have capacity to deal with your clients. We actually buy your business for your client base, but we don't need your people. So what about the people? No, they must go. We don't have space for them, and we don't have a place, and we don't have a need for them. But what about their expertise and their experience in the business? We don't need it. So it's a very hard way. It's a very sort of an aggressive way of retrenchment and staff reduction. But this happens. Mergers the same. When companies merge, I'm of the opinion that business do not merge. It's a takeover. There's always a takeover role player. There's always the one that's bigger than the other, and they take the control. Then number 3 on our list is deliberate and planned. Certain business functions closing down. Say, for instance, we have a division that they do technical support on a product that has reached the end of their lifetime, and that function in business doesn't have a need and a reason to function at the cost that we're running it. Then we close down that division of the business. What about the people? The people, then they must be retrenched, staff reduction, workforce reduction. That's it. They must go. Divisions of a business. We see this now currently happening in the customer service area of companies. They automate the customer services at such a pace that the call centers are being reduced. Customer service employees are being reduced. They just automate the way in which they engage with customers. If you look, for instance, at some of the biggest companies in the world, you can't phone Google and say, my browser doesn't work. They don't have a call center. You can't phone them. Well, probably you can phone them, but you will talk to somebody about a private issue, but you won't be able to talk to them. You can't talk to Google. You can't talk to Facebook. you can lodge something and say, this is not working. And there are private people that would then contact you and say, I can help you in a support way. And they are being paid sometimes, sometimes not. But that's it. Customer service is being automated to a point where companies will close down their customer service operations and replace it with systems. So business functions closing down is a reality of retrenchments and workforce reduction. Then functions outsourced. This also happens quite often, where a company might have a logistics department and they look after the distribution of their products. And then at a point they say, but this thing is giving us headache. We are not in the business of deliveries and logistics. So we are in manufacturing. So we're going to close this thing down, sell all the vehicles that we have, get rid of the people, outsource it to DHL or to whoever. And then we focus on our core business. And our core business is to manufacture whatever it is that we manufacture. And the distribution is being handled by a third party, and our internal distribution capabilities are being brought to an end, and the people must go. So these are deliberate and planned layoffs. And then workforce automation. This, dear delegates, is the challenge of the future. A few of us are now working on a book about the future of our world. And one of the chapters that I'm working on is the future of employment. Automated systems will replace millions of people in the workplace, not thousands, millions. And something was said many years ago, there's no office that cannot be replaced by Intel inside, and everybody was very cross with the individual. I don't want to tell you who it is, but it was a quite well-known statement that he made. And we are now there, where automated systems will probably be the basis for retrenchments going into the future. And I anticipate about 70 to 80% of all retrenchments will be as a result of systems and robotics that will replace the work of people in the workplace. So if we look at the future of employment, unemployment is on the increase. In South Africa, obviously, this number doesn't look all that good, but in other countries, it's also on the rise. Unemployment is a huge problem in Europe for many years already. In some of the European countries, having a job is actually a highly privileged position. People live off their grants, their government grants, and they can make a living from their grants. The problem, it's not a sustainable model, but unemployment in some countries in Africa, unemployment is as high as 76%. So that is massive. We are in South Africa, we are on our way to a 50% unemployment rate, and some of the analysis indicate that we might be there. Companies are under pressure to reduce cost of doing business. This is probably the brother of automation. The cost of doing business must be reduced. And the reason for that is, if you don't reduce the cost of doing the business, the neighboring or the opposition company will do it, and then you are out of business. I once did work for Ellerine Holdings. They were the biggest furniture supply chain in South Africa, and my very dear and beloved friend was the CEO, Mr. Peter Squires, and he said to me, Peter, I've got a problem. We manufacture mattresses, and our cost of manufacturing these mattresses is higher than what we will land a higher quality manufactured mattress from China in South Africa at a cost to produce of 25% saving to have it landed in South Africa. What must I do? So I said to him, Mr. Squires, you must close the factory down. He said, that'll mean that I will have to fire 2,000 people. I can't do it. So a very fine gentleman then, Mr. Squire, said to me, I don't have the heart to do it. So what do? Because the opposition company will import the mattresses, they will sell them for 25% less than your mattresses, and you will then in any way be out of 2,000 people. So this is a huge challenge. If companies do not reduce their costs of doing business, they run the risk of what Tom Peters wrote in his book, Reimagine. You may not like change. You will like irrelevance even less. Well, that's the point. You will lose your position in the market. Employment will be for highly skilled and qualified people. What we find in our research is that the future of employment will be that jobs will be reserved for highly skilled and qualified people. The run-of-the-mill jobs can easily be replaced by systems, and this will contribute to layoffs. Systems, robotics, and automated artificial intelligence capabilities will increasingly replace people in the workplace, and this will contribute to the unemployment figures that we are currently already facing. The mass will have to innovate and create self-employment. This is the future of employment, delegates, and we will see it. We will see this middle line of this slide, number 4, increasingly in our working environment, and that is that self-employment will become the future of earning a living. There's no doubt about it. Small micro businesses, 2-3 people working together, and together they provide a service, they run a business, a small little business, and they make a living out of it. This will become the future of employment. Big corporates and big international global companies will automate, because if they don't automate, they will have to close their doors. Workforce reduction will not go away. It's here to stay. It will not go away. There's no way that we will get out of it. Even governments, and I don't want to talk on behalf of any government, but even governments are currently in the process of saying we cannot sustain the number of people we employ. It's impossible. We must get the numbers down. So even governments are at risk of not being able to finance the workforces that they have built up over the years, and the tax system can just not finance it anymore. And then every employed person must answer this question: what options do I have if my current job comes to a sudden end? This is probably the most critical question that an employee must answer, and say, if you are not sure about the future of your company, and don't be too sure about it, what will happen? What'll I do if my current job suddenly comes to an end? This is a critical question, because as we said, the workforce reduction practices will not go away. So what we will do now, dear delegates, is we will have a look at the impact of workforce reduction on 5 aspects of the realities where we live and work: the credibility of business leaders, employees who stay, employees who leave the business, clients, and the brand of the business. Let's start with number 1, the credibility of business leaders. They are perceived by employees who leave as incompetent. And in some surveys that have been done, they've asked people that went through retrenchments, what do you think about the senior management and executive leaders of the business? And the majority of them said this is a result of incompetence. They didn't plan, they didn't watch the numbers, they didn't stay in touch with the market, they didn't understand the shifts in market realities, they didn't enhance the productivity, we can list. But the bottom line is business leaders are being perceived as incompetent by those who have been retrenched. Employees who stay have lost trust in their leaders. This is how it works. Those who leave say it's incompetent. They were incompetent. That's why I was retrenched. Those who stay say, okay, so when will it be me? So what they say is, I had somebody very close to me was working at a big corporate, and they started to retrench people. And she said to me, she said, the knife just missed me. It just missed me. If the knife had to cut one layer deeper, I was out. And then I said, so what now? Then she said to me, next round, I will be out. So what happens to those who stay is that they suffer a loss of trust in the credibility of the leadership team to sustain the workforce and to keep everybody employed. So it's a huge trust issue. So then what happens to the employees who stay? This is a shift. And this is what we don't want as business leaders and business owners and the board of directors and the CEO and the exco of a business, whoever and whatever you want to call the people in charge of the decision-making process, is you don't want a workforce working out of fear. And you don't want fear to live amongst your people. This is extremely negative, because the energy of fear in the workplace is destructive, it's counterproductive, and it's extremely negative for the business. The bottom line is, Bauer wrote a book in which he indicated the inside out principle, where he said that when people work out of fear, the customers can sense it and they don't want to do business with that company. Then those who can resign probably will. What we find in the research, what I found in the research, is that those who stay behind become so fearful that they resign anyway. And it might be the best people that the company must have to keep a sustainable business running. So those who stay say what they do is they say, but I can be next. I don't want to be next. So let me rather resign and do something else or find another job. So what happens during a process of retrenchment and staff reduction is there is a sudden increase in the people that resign with critical skills necessary to run the business. Because remember, those who can resign are those who can find another jobs, and they are those who have the qualifications and the skills to find another jobs. Those who cannot resign are the ones that do not have the skills and the qualifications to find another job, and then the company is then left with a workforce without the necessary skill, collective skill capability to run the business successfully. Then what they do is, this is an interesting thing that I've read an article that was published in 2016, where they have found that the employees who stay tend to downsize their colleagues in order to upsize themselves. This is how it works. So what I must do is I must downsize my colleagues so that they sit in a bad light. And if there's another round of retrenchments, they are then being cut and not me. So I downsize my colleagues in order to upsize my position in the business. And obviously this is extremely negative, something that no company can afford. Then employees who will leave the business, those are the ones that are being retrenched. In other words, they are being told, sorry, good luck and goodbye, cheers. They experience a very high impact of failure. Now, dear delegates, one day when everybody has the time, I will tell you the horrible story why I started to build Shadowmatch. Failure is the one thing that can destroy the psychology of an individual. I'm convinced that it's the only thing. Failure is the most destructive event in the life of an individual. And if failure is being internalized by the individual, the psychological position of power of that individual is destroyed. And the impact of that is huge. So a retrenchment process has the trigger to destroy the life of an individual. This is the key problem that we must address. Just between in brackets there, it's second on the list of major failure triggers. In a research that was conducted in 2009-10, they did an analysis of which failures have the highest risk of destroying the psychology of an individual. First on the list, a traumatic relationship breakup. It's the number one on the list. Second on the list, being retrenched / fired by your employer. Third on the list, a failure of a critical exam that is a life-changing moment for the individual. These are the top three things that causes an individual to internalize their failure to the point where psychologically they collapse. So what we must do is, and from a Shadowmatch perspective, we at the Shadowmatch, as the Shadowmatch team, are obsessed to help people prevent failure, because failure destroys the power of the psychology of the individual to function properly. So in all the research that has been done amongst retrenched people, they experience it as a failure in their lives. They have failed. It directly influences, on average, 10 people around the retrenched employee. So if I am retrenched by my employer, the impact is on 10 people in my immediate circle. This could be my wife, my kids, my siblings, if my brothers, sisters, my immediate circle of friends. But on average, 10 people are being impacted by a single retrenchment. In some companies, it's a bit lower. In Europe, it's about 6. In America, it's around 7.6, 7.7. All depends on where we look at the measurements. In Africa, it's 18. In South America, it's 12. But for instance, in Japan, it's only 3. But if we average this out, we come to a conclusion that's about 10 people that are impacted. So if you retrenched 500 people, then 5,500 is being impacted by that retrenchment activity of the business. Amongst 5,000 retrenched people, there was a questionnaire of 10 things that they have to select the one thing that they felt, the most prominent emotional experience that they had 1 month after retrenchment. It is, I'm being let down. I feel that it was unfair and blah, 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 blah. The majority of them reported that they had a feeling of hating the world. And that hate filters into their general life towards other people that has got nothing to do with the fact that they were retrenched by the bank. So it's not a hate to the bank. Yes, it is, because the bank retrenched me or whatever the company might be. It is an experience of hating the world. Now, this is quite an emotional thing to say and for those people to report on, but that was the majority of individuals selected that one thing that dominated their experience is, I came to the conclusion that this is a hostile world that I hate. This is what they have selected. Then on a bit of a statistical side, 1 in 10,000 individuals are able to make a positive outcome out of a retrenchment. So 1 in 10,000 individuals say, wonderful, I was waiting for this, I want to start my own business, or whatever it might be. And it's, the number is very, very, very small. People that come home from work and they say to wives or to their husbands, a great thing just happened to me. I've been retrenched. I've been waiting for this moment. I always wanted to start my own business. So obviously, these are the individuals with a very strong position of ego strength. Then the impact on clients, they lose their trust in the business. This is the ripple effect of retrenchments, is that we had this huge retrenchment of a shipping company in London, in the UK now, where thousands of people were retrenched with a video message that was posted on their WhatsApp message from the CEO, and clients have turned away from that business just out of principle. They just said, I'm just not going to do business with this company anymore because of the way they've treated their people. So it's got a huge effect on customers. There's always a negative effect on clients. They always experience this in a negative light. It's unfortunate that these things happen, but the reality is that it rolls into the lives of clients, and they experience this as very negative. And some might even close their accounts. They might even out of principle turn their business, and it happens. Unfortunately, it happens. Clients are not always on the side, are always on the side of the people. This is quite an interesting research that was done, that the clients are always on the side of the people that were retrenched. They are never on the side, well, very low percentages of them are on the side of the business and say, yeah, but you know what, it must happen, and these are the realities. The clients always feel for the people who have been retrenched and laid off. The brand of the business, there's only one thing to say about it. It is very, very, very negative for the business. It is very, very negative for the business. It's probably the most negative thing that can happen to the brand of the business if it becomes public knowledge that they went through a major retrenchment. And it will always have a negative effect on the brand and the credibility of the business. So what we will do next week, the delegates, is Shadowmatch wants to help companies and individuals to handle this unfortunate situation in the best possible way. Shadowmatch wants even bad things to turn out to be okay. And the question is, how can we do bad things in a way that it is not so bad, especially if we don't have a choice? Obviously, the choice must be don't do the bad things. But if COVID now hits a company and they just can't sustain their expense accounts and keep the business running, how do we turn that bad into the best way we can towards a positive outcome? When we have no choice other than to choose between wrong and wrong, I just want to stop the sentence there. We must steer away in our minds from the idea that life brings us to choose between right and wrong. It's not true. In most instances, life brings us to the point where we have to choose between wrong and wrong. It's not between right and wrong. That's easy. Do the right thing. Easy. Cut. Get out. Or whatever it is. If you have to choose between right and wrong, choose right and carry on with your life. The problem is, it's not always possible. In some instances, leaders and business owners must choose between wrong and wrong. Let me give you an example. Must I let the business go down and be out of business and nobody has employment? Or must I just get rid of 50 people and the other 50 will remain their jobs and keep on running the business and earn an income? Which one is right? There's no right and wrong. You have to choose between wrong and wrong. So when we have no choice other than to choose between wrong and wrong, we must do everything we can to facilitate positive outcomes for all. This is what Shadowmatch wants to do. Shadowmatch wants to help individuals and companies to facilitate a process with an optimal positive outcome for everybody, for the business and for those who stay behind, but also for those who are being retrenched. So next Wednesday, same time, same place, Susanne and I, Lisette will be the host. Susanne and I, our general manager, will show you how Shadowmatch supports the process, this unfortunate process, not to make it right, but to minimize the negative outcome and to facilitate the process with the best outcome for everybody, for the business, for the leadership team, and also for the employees that stay behind, as well as those who have been retrenched. With that, obviously, back to Lisette and questions. Thank you, Lisette.
Thank you very much, Peter. Thanks for sharing that insightful content. I think it was great and everybody learned a lot. There were comments about profound statements, and there was also a request for one of the research papers. So I will share that with you a little bit later. There are no questions at this point in time. So allow me to stop the recording. Then I will enable the setting before I stop the recording. Yes, over to you, Peter.
Yeah, I just want to comment on Sunet's comment in terms of between right and right. That's even more difficult. That is more challenging, Sunet, because sometimes if we have to choose between right and right, we experience it as an impossible choice to make. And what we then do is psychologically, the one right becomes a wrong. And we then turn the one right into a sort of a darker one, you know, sort of it's not as right as the other one. And that could have an effect on the decisions that we make. So it's not so easy, you know, deciding between right and wrong is easy. Between wrong and wrong, you are in a very tough situation, but between right and right is as tough. So it's a very valid and a very important comment that we, especially when we are in coaching, and I know that a lot of us around the virtual table are coaches, but especially if we are in coaching, we must understand this process of working through the choices in life that might be between wrong and wrong, right and right, and sometimes even horribly wrong and horribly right. Thanks, Lisette.
Thank you, Peter. Maybe just a last comment before I enable the setting to unmute the microphones. What we've also seen with the inside out principle, where you alluded to the negative effect on clients. Obviously, if a company makes a public statement about staff layoffs or employee or workforce reduction, inevitably there will be a negative sentiment against that company. But if it's just something in a smaller company that happens internally, because those clients, those staff that work with clients experience such a negativity, they obviously tell each client that they work with about this negative thing happening in the company. And we've seen many examples where customer service staff that are going through a staff layoff process, or their colleagues are being laid off, they share that sentiment, that negative sentiment with clients, and they actually instigate the clients against the business, because that's the only way for them to deal with the trauma of being laid off or seeing colleagues being laid off. So that's why it's so important for a company to do it in a positive manner. It's not always that possible, but because the impact of client service and salespeople on clients that they work with is just so enormous.
Lisette, I just want to comment on the comment that was made, I think, by Joanne about the retrenchments at SAA. Now, I don't want to repeat this all the time, but I have buried many people in my life. And I have buried 12 suicide self-death cases, 9 of them as a result of a retrenchment. It's probably retrenchments and a bad relationship breakup is probably at the root of the most self-deaths that's been committed. It is especially amongst sophisticated and well-organized people that have been in a good, successful career for many years. If they are being retrenched, that individual is at high risk of psychological crisis. It's a huge risk for people. And we do not understand, we do not always understand what we do to people when they lose their jobs. It's one of the most critical points of finding meaning in life, is to have a work, to have a job, to earn a living, and to feel, to have a sense of value and a sense of productivity and a reason to carry on with things in life. And if you take that away, it's a massive, massive impact on the individual. And what we must actually do as a group of coaches in Shadow Matches, we must really focus on helping people to deal with the crisis of being retrenched, because it's for nobody. There is no such thing. 1 in 10,000 can deal with it in a positive way, and that you can bank on that number. That's just on the comment that was made. And I always feel for people that's been retrenched. It's a horrible thing to happen.
Thanks, Peter. There was a question from one of the delegates about your thoughts on the role of Shadow Match for outplacement services contracted by a company to help retrenched staff. I think that's exactly what next week's session will be focused on. I don't know if you want to comment on that before we allow for more questions. Peter?
Lisette, yes, next week we will do exactly that. How do we facilitate the process of retrenchments? Because as we said, sometimes you just don't have a choice. The leadership team or the owners of a business just don't have a choice. So next week we will show on the system what is the best way, and I will also explain what is the best psychology of retrenchments and what is the worst way of doing it. And we can, obviously, everybody that is in the session next week can offer their support and their help for managing the process if the leadership team doesn't have an alternative than to go through a retrenchment process. But that is exactly what next week is about.
Thank you, Peter. Dear participants, I'm going to stop the recording and then I will enable the setting. I see there are some more comments coming in, and maybe some of you would like to actually participate live. Let me just stop first.